In many ways, security is like business development. There are so many ways to do it, and it will never go out of style. And more importantly, the job will never be completely done. And today's security landscape is just as diverse and topographically challenging as any go-to-market strategy could ever be. Find out more in this episode of Future Proof.
The future is here already. It's just not evenly distributed. Yet. Today's world teems with innovation. The nexus of hardware, software, and human ingenuity promises a revolution in possibilities. What does tomorrow look like? Witness Future Proof.
Yours truly, Eric Cavanaugh here, with an all-star cast for a topic that will never not be hot, folks. We're going to talk all about security today. No one is safe, so be prepared for all contingencies. We've got some rock star veterans on the call today. We've got Andy Stone from Pure Storage and Angel Rivera from CICL, I believe, is the company. Circle CI, there we go. Circle CI, and we're going to talk all about this ongoing cat and mouse game, which gets more interesting by the day, quite frankly. I'm always impressed by people who have the role of a CISO, a Chief Information Security Officer. Those folks have nerves of steel, I have to say. Andy was talking about some of his adventures in past lives before the show here. And Angel has been around as well. So Angel Rivera has seen lots of things going on in the world of developers. And I just went to KubeCon a few weeks ago, which is a really fascinating place because KubeCon refers to Kubernetes, which some of you regular listeners know is a project that came out of Google. It was a really interesting project designed to sit on top of Docker and help the containerization of functionality. What that means to the average layperson is sort of a de facto operating system for the cloud. So containers, as they're called, contain a little system process, basically instructions for how to do something. They have to be attached to persistent storage somewhere, and then they do their little job and go away, which is a much different way of getting business done in the old sort of monolithic SAP, ERP, or ECC type equation, where you have these huge applications that are supposed to do everything for the business, or at least many things for the business. And they're pretty complex and they're pretty heavy duty in terms of throughput and power and how much time and energy it takes to deploy them and to run them and so forth. And Kubernetes really flipped the script on all that. I almost view it as a sort of SOA 2.0. We had service-oriented architecture 15, 20 years ago, which was, again, a way to sort of decouple the traditional stack where you would have fine-grained services and coarse-grained services, and they would sort of connect together like Lego blocks to get stuff done. Well, I bring this up because at the Kubernetes conference, almost every single company there was either doing observability or security or some combination of the two. And that's because Kubernetes is a way to run your applications in the cloud or in a hybrid multi-cloud environment is a pretty darn complex thing. And so because of that, you have this whole ecosystem that's now built around security and around observability, what's actually happening. And then security is all your protocols for how to protect your systems, whether that's encryption or detection of outliers, detection of people doing bad things on your network, for example. A lot of this does revolve around the network. And what do you do about that? So that's what our folks are going to talk about today. So first, let's bring in Andy Stone at Pure Storage. You've got this whole background as a CISO for some pretty big organizations. So you kind of learned the ropes years ago. What are your thoughts on where things stand right now? Are we more secure than we were last year, less secure? Or is it always changing? What do you think?
I think, Eric, it's always changing. It's an evolution, as we were kind of talking about beforehand, a race almost between the attackers and the guys trying to prevent the attacks on the security side. And, it's a daily leapfrog, it seems, where you have new vulnerabilities coming out constantly with new attackers and new attack vectors. And then you have the security teams on the other side trying to race to patch those vulnerabilities and to ensure that their systems are robust and able to defend against them.
Yep. And when you talk about patching vulnerabilities, that's a great topic just to dive into a bit. How much has that changed? Like in this whole world of CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous development, which is a much different world from the old waterfall development days that we lived through. You get patches every day, sometimes every other day. The pace seems to have really increased, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the pace is constant. You constantly have new vulnerabilities showing up, so new patches coming out to address those. In terms of the overall landscape, you have a lot of companies that are kind of focused on the whole inventory view of the world, right? So as we've evolved into more of this distributed computing environment, Kubernetes and all the lightweight applications that are out there, it really becomes a lot harder task to understand everything that's running in your environment. It's so easy for development teams to go out to Amazon, put down a credit card and get access and just start building new tools, new applications that you may or may not even know about as a security professional. You have to rely on some of the tools to help you get insights and visibility into your environment. And where you can do that, of course, you have a chance of patching. Where you can't, you don't. And it's those areas where you don't know something exists that leaves the blind spots and really creates vulnerabilities for your environment.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, we watched actually and I love watching the terms, right? DevOps really changed the world of business and for the better, in my opinion. I think it really helped to solve what had been a very intractable problem of the business IT divide, right? Where all of a sudden you have developers working right with the business to solve problems that are either facing your customers through the web or suppliers or whatever the case may be, but just collaborating on the front end to crank out new functionality to get the business humming. Now, we were a little bit behind on the documentation side of things, and so maybe they solved problems and didn't really document how they solved the problem, so that was a bit of an issue. But now we have DevSecOps is a common term, which in the second is security, right? So if you think about how we're changing the production line of code that comes down from the business and gets deployed, well, that obviously is going to change the security profile, because now you're kind of looking for at the handoffs, basically from source to target, if you will. How are we closing that down? The data, the information systems. I mean, that was it the target hack, or it came through the HVAC or something? Yep. You're just like, well, it came through the HVAC. I mean, what? Can you explain that for our audience so they understand what the heck just happened there?
Well, yeah, I mean, so when the adversaries are looking for any way that they can get into a customer's environment, right? So they're scanning a whole host of elements that an organization may have, all their IoT devices, and the HVAC in this case was just one, right? But it was an unpatched environment. Weak credentials allowed the attackers to get initial access to the environment. And from there, they were able to move laterally throughout. So because the HVAC system is connected to the overall network, they were able to move between hosts and really, identify other vulnerabilities and get broader access, right? So, I mean, it's a constant problem that we're facing, and people don't think about this, but these IoT systems, they don't just exist in corporate environments. They exist in your house. I mean, your refrigerators, your TVs, everything. HVAC systems, they're all connected nowadays. And so those vulnerabilities exist everywhere. And you have to be relentless on how you're patching them. From an enterprise perspective or corporate perspective, of course, your security teams have to focus on patch management. What I'm telling folks is, they really need to be in a place where they can apply patches for critical vulnerabilities in a day, high vulnerabilities in a couple of days, a few days, mediums in a week or two, and lows in a month. And if you're not that good, you really need to focus on getting that good, because these threat actors, they act fast.
Well, and they can also take their time too, right? One of the topics we've discussed in the past is how the hacker industry does have different groups. There are people who specialize in penetration. There are people who specialize in exploitation. And so someone will penetrate your environment and then sell that access to someone else, who then comes in the next week or the week after and starts looking at how to exploit that. And, and the overall awareness that I've gathered over the years is that this storyline, the narrative around the lone hacker with the hoodie, for some reason they always have a hoodie, is just nonsense. It's not, I mean, there may be some guys like that, but that's not the real problem, right, Andy?
No, they're groups now. So, ransomware as the prime example, one that we talk a lot about and trying to help our customers be protected against, ransomware threat actor groups really are more business people at this point. They're not even the hackers in the hoodies. To your point, they're going out to the dark web. They're renting their ransomware as a service infrastructure for about $149 a month. They're going to an initial access broker who has those credentials that you talked about, buying them for pennies on the dollar for the organization they want to exploit. So they're not even really having to do any work. They're going and buying these tools, renting the tools. They even go back to the as a service providers, and they can split their take with them. They're like a 40-60 split. And those organizations will actually do everything from negotiations to payment collection from the targeted organization. So really, the guys in the hoodies, to your point, don't exist. They're now bigger groups, and those groups don't even have to do much but collect cash.
That's a great way to put it. It's very concise. I'll throw it over to Angel Rivera from Circle CI to comment on that. The industry is very refined these days, and so the good guys, the white hats, have to up their game. What do you think?
Well, so I mean, the white hats are struggling, right? At the end of the day, there's more of the folks that Andy had mentioned. I mean, I know of stories of folks that are actually, not only are they benefiting from what Andy was saying, selling access and their services, they're actually making money from folks who are contracting them to do their work. So for instance, I think it was I don't want to say the company, but a big telco company had an employee that was basically, he was getting paid so much, he hired like 3 people from different countries. I don't quite remember which ones, but they were doing his work for him. And the reason why he got caught years later was they were using an RSA token that was logged in from 3 different locations at some point. Somebody decided to do a scan, right? So imagine if these 3 people are a part of this organizations or these dark web organizations, right? You're paying them to essentially hack you, right? You're giving them access to, or your employees were doing that. So that's why I mean, what I mean by the white hats are struggling, right? Like you're already kind of you're in the minus already just because of these situations, right? And these are like just some lazy guy that decided to say, well, I'll get someone, I can pay people to do this work, right, for me, and with unintended consequences. I'm pretty sure he wasn't intending for these, subcontractors to be doing what they did inside those networks while they were working. But like I said, he got caught because someone decided, or maybe they turned on a new notification that's showed them, hey, this RSA token is being logged into from 3 different countries at the same time.
Oops. Yeah, that's leaving the breadcrumbs, right? Leaving the breadcrumbs to be able to track them down later. And I guess part of the challenge is there's so much of this stuff everywhere. And, let's face it, security often winds up being low on the totem pole, at least in the minds of senior executives. They kind of assume, all right, we'll hire the security people, they'll take care of that. Now let's get on to the rest of what we have to do. But every security person I talk to always says you have to imbue a culture of awareness in your organization, and everyone has to realize that they have a role to play, whether it's changing your passwords, simple stuff like that, or just being vigilant. I mean, phishing campaigns are everywhere. I get them. They're getting pretty clever these days with, oh, your Amazon package has arrived, for example, or your Netflix account has been turned off. And of course, I think, yay.
Well, we're also suffering from, the industry suffering from being fast, right? The expectation of, like, with my company, Circle CI, what we provide is a platform for developers to basically automate the things that they do manually. And then, that gives them the speed and consistency, reliability to like just kind of forget some of the manual things. And they even offload now security, right? So if you've heard of shift left, right? Yes. This concept of shifting left, where folks like Andy used to be the ones calling all the shots before things got to production. Now the developers have these tools that are, automated and can just go ahead and say, all right, let's do a vulnerability scan on the things we're going to release. And, so hopefully you get a notification that something's wrong, right? It's a known problem, which is another situation we could get into. But at the end of the day, we're expected to, ship faster, right? It's pretty much, and we're doing it. Big organizations are doing it thousands of times a day versus back in the day, maybe 10 years ago, we were doing it, once a month in a form of CD, right? Or some, up patch that came across, like I said, manually or whatever, right? Like we've gotten to the point where everything is fast, but we don't really, I don't think developers and entrepreneurs want to build insecure software, right? Nobody wants that liability, but it's happening because we're at the point where everything is expected to be released so fast that we're missing things, right? You're just not going to know what you don't know until it's too late.
Talking all things security with a couple of real experts here, Andy Stone from Pure Storage and Angel Rivera from Circle CI, both industry veterans. And Andy, I want to get into this whole issue around deduplication. This is a big challenge for organizations. Duplicate data can cause problems, certainly for marketing, for production, for all kinds of different things. And you guys do some pretty special work in that space. Explain to us how Pure Storage tackles the whole deduplication challenge.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Yeah, so, the way deduplication works with Pure is, we use a metadata storage layer basically to store data. And based on that, we're able to go down to a very small 4K byte level when it comes down to the deduplication process on our storage arrays. So, we're able to get very small chunks and identify duplicative, data elements throughout and basically help reduce that storage for our customers.
Yeah, and that's not a small deal. I've heard stats that every piece of information on average winds up in 8 separate databases in some organizations. And for large companies, that doesn't surprise me, because you pull it into CRM systems, you pull it into delivery systems, you pull it into sales automation systems or whatever. And granted, in the new world, we're doing things different ways, but there's a very long tail to legacy systems, right? I mean, you've got some pretty old production systems running in some of these companies that, probably haven't been addressed or sunsetted. I often joke that's one of the enterprise fairy tales is sunsetting systems, right? It's very difficult to do. So that deduplication, and it's interesting from a storage perspective, you as a vendor, as a service provider, can come in and help companies solve this problem, because otherwise, how would you even do it? I mean, there are technologies for scanning, there are data catalogs, there are all these different tools you can bring to the table. But when push comes to shove, you either have it persisted somewhere or you don't. And so that gives you a pretty interesting and powerful perspective on the challenge, right?
Yeah, I mean, doing it on the back end, we can help reduce the data footprint from, anywhere from 4 to 5 to 1 is the general average, I would say. But some workloads you can get, like VMs, for instance, you could get up to 50 to 1 data reduction.
Wow.
So if you have a lot of duplicative environments, we can save a ton on the storage side. And really, it helps improve performance as well. So, a lot that we can do on that front nowadays.
Yeah, and there's a very powerful other topic we can dive into here, which is right up your alley, I'm sure, which is hot storage versus cold storage. Now, I've heard companies talk about this for 15 years. I'm sure it's getting better every day, but you're kind of hinting at that. And this could be part of a data lifecycle strategy for organizations, because you can come in and take a look, number one, at the data landscape and figure out, okay, what do you have going on here? Where is it moving? Where do you need hot storage versus cold? And also solve that deduplication problem where you really start to improve performance. Because when you figure out which data needs to be hot and you solve that problem, boy, that makes people happy all across the board. And on the cold side, you still need it sometime, somewhere, but put that into deep storage, which is very inexpensive. So it's, It seems like an obvious thing to want to do, but it's actually very complex unless you have a portfolio of technologies to get it done, right?
Yeah, it also depends on how you actually want to use the data longer term, right? So if it's data you're not going to use, putting it out in a glacier or something, freezing it is probably not a big deal. But it's also a reason that we developed a product called Cloud Block Store, which is basically one of our storage arrays that runs natively in AWS or Azure. So we actually have pure storage arrays that, using our code base, our Purity code base, we've built native storage arrays in both those environments, leveraging our technology for our customer base. And it's really important because, we were talking about Kubernetes before. Where you're looking at building an application, because we have the same code base on both sides, you now have the same API set. So you can write an application once and you could deliver it and run it in any environment. So you could write the application in AWS and bring it back on premise to run without having to refactor it, or vice versa.
Wow.
And even go between clouds. So there's a lot of benefit. Plus, we're now able to deliver features that you don't get out of cloud-based storage, like data deduplication, compression, snapshots, safe mode, which is our security feature that helps protect against ransomware. We deliver a lot of features from that perspective up in cloud native environments as well nowadays, which is, when you start talking about the difference between storage tiers, that's really, really important, especially as customers start to think about how they're going to leverage the cloud long term.
Yeah, that's really interesting stuff. I mean, what Andy is trying to describe here is a mechanism by which you can future-proof your environments, and that's a big deal because no one likes to rip and replace. I can tell you, rip and replace is a very painful process. It almost never goes well, or it certainly never goes as planned, and winds up causing a lot of trouble. And maybe Angel, I'll bring you back in because Kubernetes. If you could explain to our audience how Kubernetes solves the OS challenge, because I think that was Google's vision, right? Is they recognize, look, you're going to have all these different environments. We want some way to communicate with whatever the environment is, the iOS, the Windows, or whatever the case may be. And so it kind of abstracted away the need to write for this environment or for that environment. But could you explain to us, including myself, how that actually works?
Yeah. So the main goal for Kubernetes is essentially to be a platform for platforms, if that makes sense, right? So the analogy of, it's maybe the operating system for cloud native, might be a little bit appropriate, but at the end of the day, yeah. So the Kubernetes kind of not mystery, but the goal is, again, to create a platform for platforms, meaning systems were basically not efficient the way we were running them with, let's say, I'm sorry, I'm slipping here with the terms. Hypervisors. Hypervisors. So, even though that was a really innovative approach and architecture compared to the option was the previous option was just, hey, we're standing up bare metal, right? On top of bare metal, on top of bare metal, and then storage arrays on top of storage arrays on top of storage arrays to support that. Where Kubernetes now is kind of taking it to the next level, where it's basically taking technology that's already been around for ages, like C groups and all that good stuff, right? And Docker has that's the beauty of Docker, was it became a wrapper for that stuff, an easy abstraction that people could actually leverage and package up applications without having to have multiple kernels running in a hypervisor, right? Now with Docker, if you look at the container, the way it works is it's a shared environment, right? So there's only one kernel, and that system, which is operating on a node, can then just be shared with multiple applications running in different containers, if that makes sense. So Kubernetes is just an orchestrator of all of that goodness, right? And lets you deploy and execute and run your platforms in that manner, compared to the hypervisor where you had to have layers and layers and layers, right? So imagine you still have a lot of resources being used, like memory and compute, just to manage the underlying hypervisor, right? Where now is these containers are all sharing that same kernel. And that's where Kubernetes is basically there. And you probably heard the term treat your containers like cattle, right? You should be able to, they're stateless. They should be stateless. They should be immutable, and you can basically shoot them in the head and they'll respawn right on their own. So that's kind of like where Kubernetes is the scheduler, the orchestrator, and yeah. With that complexity though, or with that comes a lot of complexity, right? Because the underlying bits are, how do we connect networks, meshes, right? How do we provide security? That's a good, that's a big problem within Kubernetes, is how do you secure this thing, these things that are working in unison on a cluster. How do you do that? It's not an easy task, right? And out the box, as we all know, with open source projects, security kind of unfortunately takes a back seat, because the products are still being developed, and they don't, as they're adding new features, they're not really thinking about how to secure them yet, right? Does that make sense?
It does. And, I'll throw this over to Andy, maybe. I think one of the real challenges with security is that any protocol you put in place is going to slow something down or annoy someone, whether that's credentials and just logging in. I mean, just going to do your actual login, changing the password. I mean, everyone has password issues these days. What can be done about that? I mean, I think about my darn phone. The Samsung phone always goes into lock and wants me to unlock it as I'm driving, trying to use the maps, and it goes off, and I don't want to be trying to unlock my phone while I'm driving to use the darn map. And I'm thinking, guys, can't you figure out that I'm with my phone and have been with my phone, and geolocation, all this stuff? Isn't there some way to know that it's me? And they say, oh yes, if you just look at it, it'll see you. Okay, it doesn't work very well. But how do you get around the annoyance hurdle of security protocols?
Yeah, Eric, I'm not sure that you do ultimately. I think that there are things that we can do to reduce friction. Right. In some cases, you want friction. In some cases, it's intentional, right? You want to slow things down. You want to get extra validation, that sort of thing. But, more and more, you look at what organizations are doing, like with your phone, Apple and Google. They've both integrated an option where you can now unlock with your watch, right? Computers, anyway, right? So I can unlock my laptop with just being near it, having my watch on, right? I don't even have to, touch it anymore. I think you're going to see more and more of that come into mobile devices as well. So, Apple's testing some stuff around NFC and, additional tokens for authentication. But, I don't think that you get around everything in terms of the friction. I think that at some points you want to have friction in the system. At other points you want them to be more frictionless. But over time, I think authentication continues to get better, authorization continues to get better, and those places where we want a more friction-free environment, we can probably start to develop toward it. But I think we need to be cautious in that effort as well, because you need to make well-informed and educated decisions where you're doing that.
And you're always going to need people, right? I'll throw this over to Angel. I mean, we have AI, ML for classifying, for helping us identify which needles in the haystack to focus on, but you're always going to need people to look at these systems, to be watching this stuff on a regular basis, right? It's never going to be fully automated ever, I don't think, right, Angel?
I mean, why would you want it to be, right? Like, at the end of the day, that to me is the definition of insanity. Like, you're gonna let the computers, dictate things. So yeah, there definitely a balance needs to be struck, and the humans need to have the upper hand, right? At that point. But look, I worked in federal government for many, many years. I know for a fact that there are vulnerable systems operating right now, and on critical systems, and these organizations are essentially going, hey, we do assessments, we know these things exist, but we're willing to take the risk, right? So they set risk levels, and Andy can probably talk to this way better than I can. But you know, it's accepting a certain level of risk of this system that is a real danger.